Because the Rinnegan is the strongest doujutsu in the Naruto series, many people just assume it's immune to Genjutsu, but it's actually not. Genjutsu can work on a Rinnegan user. There are two ways really to analyze Genjutsu on the Rinnegan, the first one being non-ocular Genjutsu, and I know that when people claim the Rinnegan is immune to Genjutsu, they do mean ocular Genjutsu for the most part, but we can still talk about non-ocular stuff, because we clearly see it working on Pain when Jiraiya uses the frog song, or rather Fukasaku and Shima use when Jiraiya is fighting Pain. They don't have a lot of trouble catching 3 paths with that Genjutsu, and it works really well against them. Or should I say, it was a little bit difficult because Fukasaku and Shima had to sync up their singing so that they can catch somebody in the Genjutsu, but they still caught the 3 paths of Pain. So yeah, this is pretty solid proof that Genjutsu will work on the Rinnegan, at least the auditory variety. But there's also something else that's interesting to analyze when it comes to Genjutsu and the 6 paths of Pain, which is, why can't Nagato just break his paths out of the Genjutsu? Because if you think about it, he is constantly sending a stream of chakra to control the paths of Pain. And what you need to do in order to break somebody free from a Genjutsu is to send some chakra into that person to disrupt their chakra flow, breaking the Genjutsu in the process. This is something that should probably work in Nagato's position there, because he is sending chakra into the paths non-stop. Now, one pretty interesting theory is that Nagato let himself be caught by the frog song and didn't break out his paths on purpose so that he could catch Jiraiya off guard. And as he was gonna bring every single path into the battlefield and revive the ones Jiraiya took down, this wouldn't really be a net loss for Nagato. But the Genjutsu did work on the paths of Pain. If they were outright immune to it, then they wouldn't even be able to be caught by the frog song. It's kind of like a perfect Jinchuriki if you think about it. They are not immune to Genjutsu, you can still put them under the Genjutsu, but it's very easy to break them out when the tail beast simply shakes their Genjutsu out of their bodies. They're not immune because, well, the Genjutsu simply works on them, but it's very easy to break out if that makes any sense. But that's not ocular Genjutsu, and I think it's more interesting to talk about that particular variety when it comes to the Rinnegan, because that's the assumption people make, really. The Rinnegan is the strongest ocular jutsu, and therefore there isn't any type of ocular genjutsu that's going to work against it. It's just going to outright block it. Well, the story is not that straightforward. First, because we can talk about the Rinnegan in terms of a path Rinnegan or in terms of a real Rinnegan, because the Rinnegan that appears in the Paths of Pain, for example, they are just projections. They are not real Rinnegan. Think about this for a second. There are 6 paths of pain roaming the world with a pair of Rinnegan each. It's not as though Nagato awakened the Rinnegan 7 times, counting himself. No. Whenever you introduce the rods of the 6 paths into the bodies that you want to turn into paths, they will manifest a Rinnegan, just like the animal path summons, for example, and then you will be able to see through their eyes and implant one of the 6 paths powers into the particular body. But those are just projections. They are not the real thing, so much so that every single path only has 1 ability from the 6 paths. So the validity of a claim saying that the true Rinnegan will block every genjutsu is a little bit questionable in the path's case because, well, they don't really have a real Rinnegan. But I will say that Nagato breaking them out very easily once he realizes his paths under a genjutsu because, well, he can see things through the eyes and then send chakra to shake the genjutsu off their bodies makes a lot of sense, and it would be a very neat thing to see. But even if we assume that the Rinnegan the paths acquire whenever they are transformed into paths works just like the real Rinnegan in terms of resisting genjutsu, it is still not a guarantee that it will just simply block anything it's thrown against it. And people will debate and argue that no, the Rinnegan is completely immune to genjutsu. But this is never stated, claimed. Nobody even says that in the entire series. Fukasaku's first thought when Jiraiya ran out of options in terms of ninjutsu and taijutsu was to use genjutsu on the Rinnegan user, Pain. Even though it wasn't an ocular genjutsu, you would think that he would consider it if he had this idea that the Rinnegan would just completely negate genjutsu, but he never really does. He was like, no, yeah, genjutsu's gonna work, bro. Trust me, Jiraiya, let's go for it. But regardless, yes, the Rinnegan is extremely powerful. It is the strongest doujutsu in the series, but But we learn that when it comes to Ocular Genjutsu in the series, in order for it to work or not, what matters most is the prowess of the user of the Genjutsu and not the strength of his eye. This is very much shown and explained in the Itachi vs Sasuke fight. Now, this particular fight begins with Itachi and Sasuke exchanging Genjutsu non-stop in the beginning of the fight. For an entire chapter or even more than that, both characters remain still while they hit Genjutsus at each other, countering the Genjutsu and then layering other Genjutsus on top of the ones that they countered. It's very iconic and an interesting fight to watch. Now, in that particular situation, both characters were using the base 3 Tomoe Sharingan to cast Genjutsus on each other, and they were very much staring at each other's eyes on purpose so that, well, they could cast Genjutsu properly. Well, it makes sense for them to be kinda tied against each other, even though Itachi is more skilled and powerful than Sasuke in that particular situation. Sasuke was still giving all he had because in that situation he had to fight the guy who killed his entire family, had a lot of motivation, and their Sharingan were pretty much equally matched in terms of their evolution there. But then after Itachi realizes that catching Sasuke in normal Genjutsu won't work, he activates his Mangekyo Sharingan and casts Tsukuyomi on Sasuke, one of the strongest Genjutsus in the entire series by a long shot. And you would think that once Itachi manages to put Sasuke under Tsukuyomi, Sasuke immediately loses, which is a fair assumption. Even Zetsu, who was watching the fight, thought that, because, well, Tsukuyomi, GG, man, there's nothing Sasuke can do about it. Look at what happened to Kakashi in part 1. He stared at Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan and passed out for weeks, so now he had to come and heal the guy. But something different happens in this situation. As Itachi makes his Tsukuyomi illusion, showing Sasuke that he's going to remove his eye to awaken the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, something strange happens. Sasuke breaks out of Tsukuyomi with sheer ocular prowess. Because that's really what it is, right? You cannot break somebody out of Tsukuyomi because it happens in the flash of an instant. There's no time to break somebody out of it. That's the reason why Tsukuyomi would still work on a perfect Jinchuriki, because sure, your tail beast can break you out of normal Genjutsu, but once you get hit by Tsukuyomi, you experience that torture for days and no time passes in the real world, so there's no time for it to be broken out, and therefore Tsukuyomi essentially destroys you without the tail beast being able to do anything. That's why Naruto tells B, if you get hit by Amaterasu or Tsukuyomi when they're facing Itachi, you're done. Don't get hit by those. So really the only way to escape Tsukuyomi is to break out of it from within the illusion, and that requires a lot of mastery over your ocular prowess, which Sasuke showed in the fight. Now, a lot of people say that, well, Itachi just let him break out of Infinite Tsukuyomi because, well, that's the entire plan, right? Itachi didn't want to win the fight in the end of the day. And true, yeah, that's the entire thing about this fight. However, the data book literally states that Sasuke did break out of it on his own volition. It wasn't Itachi letting him do so. And yes, data book statements are, let's just say, less than reliable many times, but it is something in the end of the day. Sasuke managed to break out of Itachi's Tsukuyomi, a Mangekyo Sharingan Genjutsu, using his base 3 Tomoe Sharingan, because he didn't even have the Mangekyo at that time of the story. And that really impresses White Zetsu. He's in disbelief. Well, how can Sasuke break out of it? He doesn't have a Mangekyo. It shouldn't work like that. But Black Zetsu then says, the Sharingan, or whatever doujutsu you have really, is just a shinobi weapon, like a shuriken or a kunai. What matters most when you're using a shinobi weapon is the ability of the user. And then Black Zetsu says that a master can beat somebody using shuriken while he uses a pebble, simply because he has better skill. He's more talented, he's trained more. And that's what happened here in the fight. Yes, Sasuke's quote-unquote weapon, his 3 Tomoe Sharingan, is inferior to Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan, but Sasuke's abilities and prowess with his eye far exceeded Itachi's expectations, and therefore Sasuke was able to break out of Tsukuyomi, which is something extremely difficult to do. But what does that have to do with the Rinnegan? Well, the same principle can be applied in here, but in reverse. Yes, the Rinnegan is an extremely extremely powerful shinobi weapon in this scenario, the most powerful weapon you could possibly have. But if somebody with an inferior weapon that's much more skilled than you aims a genjutsu at you, even though you have such an extremely potent doujutsu, you are still susceptible to fall for it. The greatest shield in this particular situation will not grant you immunity to genjutsu. Just like a perfect Susanoo, for example, is an extremely potent defense against physical damage, but it can still be bypassed. Now, the reason why people may think the Rinnegan is immune to genjutsu is because that usually Rinnegan users will be already extremely powerful at genjutsu because they had to evolve their Sharingan to the Mangekyo Sharingan to the Rinnegan, and in that process they probably acquired a great prowess using genjutsu. Like, nobody's gonna try to put Madara under a genjutsu, for example, and nobody's gonna try to put Rinnegan Sasuke under a genjutsu. If Sharingan Sasuke was able to break out of Tsukuyomi, then Rinnegan Sasuke would do much better. But what if I told you that there is an example of a Rinnegan user being put under a genjutsu? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But before that, let's talk about Nagato here for a second, because nobody ever really aims an Ocular Genjutsu at the Paths of Pain, or even Nagato himself. Now, to be fair, there weren't many opportunities for anybody to put the Paths of Pain under an Ocular Genjutsu when he attacked the Leaf Village or when he fought against Jiraiya. I mean, Jiraiya doesn't have Ocular Genjutsu, and his summons don't have that either. And then when Pain attacks the Leaf Village, the only person who could have tried Ocular Genjutsu on him would have been Kakashi. He does have a Sharingan and he can use Ocular Genjutsu with it, however, it's not really his MO whenever he fights. The times he uses Ocular Genjutsu are very few and far between and never in major fights, so he wouldn't really change his tactics this particular time, especially when he's fighting against such an overwhelming opponent such as Pain. It makes sense as to why nobody would even try Genjutsu on him. And then when he fights against Itachi in the war arc, a guy that always uses Genjutsu in his fights, well, the fight's over in half a chapter, so there really wasn't much time for Itachi to even use Genjutsu on Nagato. Why would he use Genjutsu when he could just use the Totsuka blade to seal the guy for real? But think about this for a second here. Nagato got his Rinnegan eyes from Madara after Madara gave them to Nagato unbeknownst to him, so that one day Nagato could revive Madara using the Rinne Tensei, and he never even came close to having Madara's prowess with his eyes. Madara could use several different abilities with a Rinnegan, and Nagato was kinda limited to the 6 paths, the most basic Rinnegan stuff. So it's easy to say that, yes, Nagato had the strongest weapon possible in the shinobi world, but he was by no means a master at it. Now, he was pretty good at using the 6 paths and combining them in different strategies, but when it comes to the entire array of powers that Madara's eyes had, he really doesn't do much. So it's likely that if a very powerful Ocular Genjutsu user fought against Nagato and managed to catch him in a Genjutsu, if they make eye contact, Nagato would probably fall for the Genjutsu. I don't see Nagato breaking out of Tsukuyomi, for example, because no, the Rinnegan eyes are not outright immune to Genjutsu, and Nagato simply wouldn't have the Uchiha prowess to break out of it. And I know a lot of people are saying, no, the Rinnegan is immune to Genjutsu. You simply cannot use Ocular Genjutsu on it. It's just not going to work. Well, let's talk about an actual canon event when a Sharingan user was able to put a Rinnegan user under a Genjutsu. And yes, it's an overlooked part of the series, but it is what I just described. The Rinnegan was put under Ocular Genjutsu. Remember when Kakashi and Obito went to the Kami dimension? I mean, of course you do, because it's one of the most iconic fights in the anime. But before they actually fought, Obito and Kakashi had a lengthy conversation, and while they were talking about stuff, they had a Genjutsu exchange just like Itachi and Sasuke had back in the day when they fought. That Obito just so happened to be a Rinnegan user, and Kakashi was able to put him under Ocular Genjutsu, staring at him with his Sharingan eye and putting him under Genjutsu. Now, of course, Kakashi didn't win the fight through Genjutsu. He wasn't able to put Obito under a very powerful Genjutsu to make him fall asleep for a long time or whatever, but Obito was still effective affected by Genjutsu in that situation. And that's the entire thing. It proves that the Rinnegan cannot simply block Genjutsu regardless of the power of the Genjutsu that you throw against it. And bear in mind, Kakashi was using a single Sharingan with 3 Tomoe to cast that Genjutsu against a Rinnegan user. And the Genjutsu was binding Obito. He was seeing illusions of himself fighting against Kakashi in that situation, but it wasn't defeating him because Obito could break out of it. Obito is a powerful Genjutsu user. We see that he was able to control Yagura. Even though Yagura is not a perfect Jinchuriki, he had a lot of mastery over his tail beast, but because he wasn't friends with his tail beast, he wasn't broken out of Obito's Genjutsu, so Obito could control him. And Obito could also control the 9 tails with his Sharingan Genjutsu, so he was able to shrug off Kakashi's Genjutsu, but the Genjutsu was still affecting him. If the Rinnegan was immune to Genjutsu, then Obito wouldn't see any illusions in that particular situation. Now you may be saying, well, Obito had only one Rinnegan, the other eye was a Sharingan. That is true, but still, he had a Rinnegan and he was affected by Genjutsu. You would expect that if the Rinnegan was actually immune to it, one of them would be enough to block any Genjutsu. I mean, Sasuke only has one Rinnegan and people still claim that he is immune to Genjutsu. Why wouldn't the same thing apply to Obito here? Yes, Rinnegan Sasuke is much more powerful than this version of Obito, but they both have one Rinnegan. And because Obito is not an original awakener of the Rinnegan, he's borrowing that from Madara just like Nagato was, his abilities with the Rinnegan will be lower and therefore Kakashi will still be able to affect him with his Genjutsu. The Black Zetsu explanation about the power of who uses the weapon fits perfectly in this situation. So yeah, the Rinnegan is not immune to Genjutsu. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, like this video to help me out with the YouTube algorithm, it really helps, and watch this other video right here for more cool Naruto content. Thank you so much for watching, guys.